Hello everyone and welcome to the finals of the FIDE Grand Prix. It's Wei Yi with the white pieces against Ian Nepomniachtchi, and they are battling it out to see who will take first place, of course, but not only that, to see if MVL gets into the candidates, or if Nepo wins the finals, then Nepo gets into the candidates, and then MVL is out, since the wild card can only be a Russian player. And if Nepo, well, basically it's between Kirill Alexeyenko and Ian Nepomniachtchi, and if Nepo qualifies via the FIDE Grand Prix, then Alexeyenko gets the other candidate spot for finishing third in the FIDE Grand Swiss tournament that we've also covered. So that being said, let's check out the game. Wei Yi with the white pieces opens with knight f3. The Reti opening, we have knight to f6, c4 and c5. We have knight to c3, knight to c6, so the symmetrical, and d4. C captures, knight captures, and e6 now. We have g3 by Wei Yi, preparing to fianchetto the light square bishop, and queen to b6 now, putting pressure on the knight on d4, and now comes knight d to b5, just avoiding any trades, going for the d6 square. We have knight to e5, and now comes bishop to g2. Now that the d6 square is nicely protected, so it's not a problem. Bishop g2, and a6 now, pushing the knight back. Knight to a3, well, not right away, but after a6, queen to a4. Now you cannot capture because the rook would be hanging, and rook to b8. So this is a well-known line which Nepo goes for. We have knight back to a3, and now bishop to e7 or even captures on a3 have been played here, but Nepo goes bishop to c5, goes for the f2 pawn, and it's not a problem. You don't have to worry about any knight a4 ideas since the queen is on a4. We have castles. Now the f2 pawn is nicely protected, and also Nepo castles, and the rook to b1. Now the bishop can be developed as the b2 pawn is also protected. And here again, there are a lot of moves that have been played here. d6 has been played here, bishop back to e7 has been played here, knight to c6 has been played here, but the move Nepo plays queen b4. The early offer of a queen trade is a new move, and it is as of move 12 that we have a completely new game. So Wei Yi declines the trade. He goes back, queen back to d1, and now just d6. So it's a pretty weird setup here, but if it works, you know, why not? And here, knight to a4. Perhaps a bit unprincipled. Maybe you won't start developing your other pieces, but Wei Yi is a 2700 plus player. He can break the principles. So knight to a4. He wants to trade bishop for a knight, and Nepo welcomes it with b5. We have knight captures on c5, queen captures, and c captures on b5. We have a captures on b5. And only now bishop to g5 developing. And here Nepo doesn't mind the doubling of the pawns. He just goes bishop to a6. Now he wants to play b4, open up this diagonal for his light square bishop. We have knight back to c2. Now if you can get a3 and b4 in, should be very nice for white. So b4 right away, not allowing it. Also, you don't want to allow something like a3 and knight to b4, could be quite a blockade. So opening up the light square diagonal, and now knight to d4. We have bishop back to b7, now offering a trade of light square bishops, and rook to c1, pushing Nepo's queen back. Queen to a5, attacking the a2 pawn, and here bishop captures on b7 first. We have rook captures, and now Wei Yi captures on f6. He messes up the king's pawn structure. We have g captures on f6, and now queen to b3, defending the a2 pawn. But now rook to a8, and here it's black's pawn structure is a bit messed up. The material on the board is equal, but it's Nepo who definitely has the pressure, especially on the a file. And here we have f4 by Wei Yi, pushing the knight back. But before reacting to this, queen to a7, saying, okay, you capture, I'm just gonna capture with check, and then pick up the pawn as well. So e3 defending, and then only now knight back to d7. And here there really is no good way of defending the a2 pawn, well, unless you want to move your rook away from the only open file on the board, and then just give black the open file. Here we have queen back to d1, trying to create some chances on the king side, and it comes with the price of one pawn. So queen captures on a2, queen to g4 with check, king h8, and now queen to h5, going after the f7 pawn. And now comes king back to g8. Here Wei Yi repeats, queen g4 check, king h8, queen to h5. We have king to g8, and here Wei Yi is not all that satisfied with how things turned out, and he doesn't want a draw with the white pieces already, since they basically just started playing. So he decides to go for something more. Knight to b5. Now he's threatening the d6 pawn, and everything seems to be perfectly fine. Seems like he can always repeat if he wants to, but here Nepo says nope. Rook captures on b5. Here Nepo gives up the exchange for grabbing yet another pawn. And okay, queen captures on b5, and then now queen captures on b2. So not only are you up 2 pawns, but also you have a very strong passed b pawn, which is very unlikely that you'll be able to keep, but for the moment you have it. Rook b1, attacking the queen, and now queen to c2. And for the moment the pawn is off limits. If you grab it, just rook to a2, and you are not preventing checkmate here. Either queen g2 or queen to h2 will be mated. There's no defense against this. So after rook c2, we have rook f to c1, pushing the queen back, and then now queen to d2. And now Nepo is threatening to capture on e3, so you cannot keep harassing the black queen. And here, queen captures on b4. Wei Yi decides to eliminate the passed pawn, but he has to allow queen captures on e3 with check. We have king h1, and then now rook to a2. With some nasty threats like queen to f3 check, followed by queen to g2 mate, so you have to defend. We have rook to c8 check first, king to g7, and now rook to b2, just blocking this rook. So what do you do here? We have queen to f3 check first. If you go rook to a1 check, white just defends, so it's not a problem. We have queen f3 check, king g1, and queen to d1 check. King to g1, and now rook to a1 with the idea of queen to f1 mate. So queen to b5, defending the f1 square, and now just f5. There's no worry about queen captures because queen to f1 is still mate. So we have queen back to e2, offering a queen trade, and now queen d5 check. Now it's Nepo who avoids the queen trade. King back to h3, not back to h3. I realize that I sometimes say back to h3 even though the king was never actually there. I don't know why I do it, but I just do. So knight to f6. Now the knight has some ideas of coming to g4, but also to e4. If you will be, for example, if you place the knight on e4, move the queen, then perhaps you can start advancing your d pawn. But okay, rook b to b8 now. And having a lot of pressure along the back rank, and here comes rook to a2, now putting pressure on the queen. If you move the queen away from the defense of the g2 square, you don't want to allow something like queen g2. So we have rook to c2, again blocking. So we have rook captures on c2, queen captures on c2, and queen to f3 check. With some nice ideas of hoping to get the king up the board, but it's not going to be easy. If you could get something like to guard the g2 square, for example, with the knight, something like knight g4 to e3, that'd be great. Then queen h5 would be mate, since the knight would be covering the g2 square, but that's a lot of work. So rook to b3, pushing the queen back, not allowing any sneaky ideas. Queen f1 check, queen blocks, queen g2, and now queen to e1. We have queen back to b2 and king to g6, just unpinning so the knight can move. King back to g2, now it's really back to g2, and now d5. We have rook to b8 and queen to e4 with check. We have king back to h3, and now queen to f3. So again, we reach a similar position, only the pawn has been advanced, but again, you don't want to allow black any moves here. So rook back to b3. If you try something like queen to b3, that's not the same. It doesn't work because now queen to f1, you no longer have this, and if after king moves, now you just start pushing your pawn, and it's well, the queen already guards d3 and d1. The knight comes to e4, it's going to be, well, it's just over here. So rook to b3, like the previous time, queen f1 check, queen again blocks, queen g2, queen to e1, again, everything the same, queen to c2, and queen to f1 check. Queen to g2, now queen back to c4, and rook to b8. So Wei Yi is just saying, okay, if you want to try and make progress, try and make progress. We have h6, a nice pawn move, so you don't mess up and run into a 50-move rule. And king to h4 now. Remarkably, but the king is quite safe there. And here is the moment that Nepo should definitely have start pushing the d pawn, but instead he went for queen to d3. Queen to d3 is a sneaky move. Of course, you want to play queen d1 followed by queen to h5 mate. Now that the king is on h4, but it also allows white to a chance to consolidate. So rook back to b2. Now, if you go to d1, you can always just block with the queen. It's not a problem since both the rook and the queen control the second rank. And then now knight to g4. Again, there's always this opportunity to play d4, but it's remarkable how long Nepo will try everything else until he maybe pushes it. So queen to e2, again Wei Yi wants the trade. We have queen back to d4, and now king back to h3. It's important to mention that Wei Yi has only 4 minutes on the clock and Nepo has 18 minutes on the clock, but there is increment, so you do get 30 seconds every time you make a move. So it's not that big of a deal. Queen to g1 by Nepo, putting pressure on h2, although it's not really that big of a deal since, well, it's very nicely protected, but queen g2, pushing it back, queen to d4, and now again queen e2. We have queen to c5, Wei Yi just repeats, queen c2, he says, okay, I'm up for a draw, Nepo repeats, queen g1, we have queen g2 again, but now Nepo switches the move order. Now he first goes queen to e3, a nice triangulation with the queen, queen to e2, and only now queen d4. So it's the exact same position, only now it's a Wei Yi's move. So he can now play whatever he wants, but that usually means that you will have more chances to make a mistake. So queen to c2, but now knight to e3, attacking the queen here, and already the knight is a very unpleasant piece here. We have queen to b3, getting the queen out of the way, and now knight to d1 with an attack on the rook, and also you have knight to f2 check if needed. But also very interesting was queen e4, because like I said, the knight covers the g2 square. Something like queen f3 to h5 could be made, but white has a very nice defense. It's queen to b8, and now if you continue with queen f3, you get queen to g8 check, and now it's a draw. King f6, you're going to go queen h8, queen g8, queen to h8, or if you go to h5, then queen captures and f7 is made. So although it is possible to play with the queen e4 to f3 idea, well, not to f3 idea, but queen e4 is possible, but you will have to continue in a different way. For example, if queen e4, queen to b8, you're going to have to go king g7, and now queen e5 check trades queens, which, you know, captures. You will black is of course better, but you know, it's hard to say if black will be able to push for more than half a point. So after queen to b3, Nepo goes for knight to d1 instead, and now rook to e2, getting the rook out of harm's way. Knight to f2 check, and now you can't go for some like king h4, then queen f6 is mate. So instead, king back to g2, and now knight back to g4. Also, we reach a very similar position, and now queen to b8, again with some threats of queen to g8. So knight back to f6, guarding the g8 square, and now queen back to b2. Again, Wei offers a queen trade, queen back to c5, rook c2 attacks the queen, and queen to e3. We have rook to e2, queen to a7, and now comes queen to a2. We have queen back to c5, and queen to c2. So Wei still hoping to get that draw. Queen to d6 now with the ideas of pushing the pawn, and now queen to b2. And here's the question: do you push the pawn or do you not push the pawn? And it's really interesting what happens if you push the pawn. If you push the pawn, then you get, well, the question is, can the pawn survive after rook to d2? Because now it's obviously attacked twice. The point is, you have queen d5 check, king g1, and now after d3, white will have to play a move. And it's interesting, but there's only one good move for white here, and it's queen to a3 with a double attack from the queen on a3. It's incredibly hard to find, as you'll see, because here now you have to go for queen d4 check, king g2, queen e4 check, king h3, and now queen to e1. Now you give up your precious pawn after the queen captures it. Queen captures, now you play knight e4, where the rook is under attack, and now there is no defense against, well, knight f2 check. So once you move the rook from harm's way, you still play knight f2 check. Now you have to You have to capture it, otherwise you lose the queen on d3. It's a very nice fork. So rook captures, queen captures, and you get this endgame where black is up a pawn in a queen and pawn's endgame. So this is basically what you get if you push d4 with perfect play from white. But Nepo plays knight e4. He prefers to have his knight on e4 before starting to advance the pawn, but of course now Wei Yi prevents it with queen to d4. And now gaining control of this diagonal, it will be very hard for Nepo to push d4. So queen to a6 attacks the rook on e2. We have rook back to c2, and now knight back to f6. So just going back and forth for now, playing on Wei Yi's low time, but there is increment, so Wei Yi not in all that much time trouble. Rook back to d2, and now queen to a5. We have rook to e2, and now queen to a3. And here, Wei Yi plays queen to b2. He offers a queen trade, and now queen back to a7. Now again, gaining control of the d4 square, and now queen a2. Again, Wei Yi offers a trade. Queen back to d7, and again, queen back to b2. And now, Nepo took this opportunity. It's the exact same position as before, only the queen is on d7 instead of on d6. But it's really, it doesn't really matter in this case. So here, Nepo does play d4. So what happens next is rook to d2, like we've shown in the previous line. Queen to d5 check. That's why I said it was completely the same if the queen was on d7 or on d6, because queen d5 check is crucial for the line. And now comes king to g1. King h3, not really good. After d3, the queen can come here, and it's not gonna be very pleasant. Or you can go to f3 with ideas of queen to f1, and you will not be able to hold off that and guard the d3 pawn at the same time. Also, the knight is jumping in. So after king to g1, we have d3. And here we have that moment where I said it's completely the same as before. Queen to a3, the only good move, but Wei Yi, who was now lower on time, I doubt he had time to calculate all of the intricacies that show up after the d pawn is pushed, played queen to e5. He offered a queen trade here, and he wants to go into an endgame, for example, captures, knight moves, you capture the d3 pawn, makes sense. But it doesn't work. This move actually loses the game for Wei Yi. So feel free to pause the video and try to figure out why it loses the game while I give you a couple of seconds. In fact, Wei Yi had 3 minutes here, so take even 3 minutes if you like. Yeah, so it's fair. So for those of you who were able to do it in 3 minutes or less, or even more, congratulations on finding the only move that wins in this complicated endgame. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's queen to e4. You offer the queen trade this way, because now if the queens are traded, now you get 2 connected pass pawns here, and that's of course just winning. And if you don't trade queens here, well, you don't really have a move. Well, black can just take all the time in the world and play all the useful moves he wants. He can play knight d5 to e3 to c4, fork the queen and the rook, or just kick away the rook, start pushing the d3 pawn. If you don't trade, you don't have a move, black just wins. So Wei Yi traded here, but now, like I said, 2 connected pass pawns, that's too strong. King f2 was played with knight to d5, not allowing king e3. So king back to e1, and now king to f5 with rook to d1, trying to hold, but it's very hard. e5. We have king to d2, captures on f4, we have captures, and now rook to a1, trying to make use of the rook from the side. King e5 with ideas of just coming here and starting to push the pawn. We have rook to a6, attacking the pawn, but Nepo even protects that one. We have rook to a8, and now f5. And it was in this position, on move 96, that Wei Yi resigned the game, and Nepo wins the first game of the Classic, which brings him very close. He's almost in the Candidates tournament. Well, I kind of think he's in the Candidates tournament whether he wins or loses to Wei Yi, because if it's between him and Kirill Alexeyenko who gets the wild card, I really do think that they'll pick Nepo, but you know, either way. But yeah, here it's just too easy for whatever white plays. Let's say you do a few checks, check, and the knight blocks. Next, you don't really have a move. Next, you can just play f4, e3, and the pawns just do the work themselves. So after f5, Wei Yi resigned, and well, like I said, Nepo is almost in the Candidates tournament, and MVL is almost not in the candidates tournament. But there's still chance if Wei Yi wins tomorrow with the black pieces in a classical game and then beats Nepo in the tiebreaks, then it's MVL who qualifies via the FIDE Grand Prix, and Nepo will most likely get the wild card, but I could be completely wrong. I have no idea if they just flip a coin when they have 2 wild cards, or is there like a meeting or maybe a discussion, you know, who knows how they do it. But yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Sanjay Sharaf, Stefan Miller, Daniel Drelic, Trent Lucier, and John Roberts for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon. Continuing the coverage of the FIDE Grand Prix finals, continue to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. And do be a part of the subscribers video. If you don't know what it is, there's info about it in the description below. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your Saturday.